271 chat group. No matter what era it was, shops that were downtown had no need to worry about rent. Yu Bing and Xiaoxing strolled around for 2 to 3 hours, but they didn't see anyone renting out anything. When it was time to eat, Xiaoxing pulled Yu Bing into the noodle shop by the roadside. Let's eat first. Because she had no idea what to do next, Yu Bing was feeling vexed. I don't have an appetite. You can eat yourself. Xiaoxing pressed Yu Bing's shoulder to make her sit on the stool in front of the dining table. Then, he said mysteriously, don't worry, I've thought of a way, but I can only tell you after you eat dinner. Yu Bing looked at Xiaoxing suspiciously. Xiaoxing moved the menu to Yu Bing and said, order what you want to eat. If it's too late, the restaurants will close and you'll only be able to eat the bland food in the guest house. The guest house also had food, but it didn't taste very good. Therefore, Yu Bing took the menu and said, I want a bowl of braised beef noodles. After Xiaoxing made his choice, he queued up to place an order. 10 minutes later, Xiaoxing placed 2 bowls of noodles on the table. Yu Bing couldn't help but ask again, tell me the solution you came up with. Xiaoxing knew that if he didn't say it, Yu Bing wouldn't feel at ease eating this meal, so he didn't hide it anymore. I think our direction is too limited. We shouldn't just look around downtown. There are indeed a lot of people there, so it's easier for others to see our brand. However, as you can see, everything we can see is rented out already. Yu Bing pursed her lips and thought for a moment before agreeing to Xiaoxing's suggestion. The shops were all state-owned. Since they didn't close down, they naturally wouldn't vacate the shops unless the shops needed to be moved to another address. However, Yu Bing and Xiaoxing were here on a business trip to choose a location, so they couldn't keep waiting forever. Because they no longer considered the downtown location, the range of locations expanded substantially. Yu Bing took out the map from her bag and said, in that case. Xiaoxing placed the map on the table beside him. Then, he looked at Yu Bing gently as he said firmly, eat noodles first. It won't taste good anymore if it's mushy. Yu Bing frowned when she thought of this. Mushy noodles would be a waste of money, so she picked up the chopsticks on the table and started eating. After Yu Bing hurriedly finished the noodles, she studied the map. These factories are very scattered. We have to find a relatively concentrated place. Xiaoxing lowered his eyes and thought for a moment before suggesting, actually, we can also find the factory with the most workers and the best employee benefits in City C and collaborate with the supply company closest to that factory. As long as we let them display our goods and coupled with the advertisement created by our image shop, we can start to venture into City C's market. Yu Bing's eyes lit up when she heard this. If the employee benefits are good, when the workers have money, they will naturally go to the supply company to spend it. Good idea. We've opened 10 offices at once now. If the number of orders increases, it will be a little difficult for the food factory to supply them. Although the marketing effect will be delayed if we're far from the city center, there are benefits to taking things slow. Moreover, the rent is relatively cheaper. Thinking about it this way, this choice seemed quite appropriate for the situation. Now, the main problem was to find a large factory that met the requirements. The two of them walked out of the noodle shop while looking at the map. They discussed going to the entrances of the various factories if it really didn't work out. At this moment, Yu Bing turned around and saw a group of middle-aged people gathered under a tree in the distance. Yu Bing had an idea and turned around to walk towards a small shop she had seen previously. Xiaoxing followed with a puzzled expression. Then, he saw Yu Bing buy 2 pounds of mung bean cake. Be it in the city or the countryside, it seemed to be a habit for people to chat in groups under the tree after dinner. There were 10 to 20 people chatting, so it was the local information exchange center. They gossiped about relationships, factories in the city, and what employee benefits were given this month. New policies issued by the government were their favorite topics of conversation after meals. Subscribe and read more novel to help us update chapter quickly. Thank you so much. 272 alert. Yu Bing watched from afar first. Under the tree, there was a long stone bench built with cement around the tree roots. Beside it, there were 2 sets of stone tables. Most of the people gathered towards one side of the stone table. A woman in her 50s, who was sitting on a matching stone stool, was watching her grandson while listening to everyone talk. Occasionally, she would chime in. Yu Bing realized that as long as she spoke, the sounds of discussion would become softer and most of their attention would be focused on this woman. Hence, Yu Bing walked towards her with a faint smile on her face as she said warmly, "Hello, I want to ask you something." When the auntie looked up at Yu Bing, she realized that she was an unfamiliar girl in her 20s who even had an accent. Beside her, there stood a sturdy young man of about the same age. The auntie beckoned to her grandson, who was talking to another child, and pulled him to her side. When the others saw that it was an unfamiliar face, they also called their children back to their side. Yu Bing looked at Xiaoxing in confusion. Although her appearance wasn't very amiable, she didn't look like a bad person, right? Yu Bing and Xiaoxing had just arrived in City C and didn't know that 2 children had gone missing nearby a few days ago. Even after the police intervened, they had yet to find them. One was a 5-year-old boy who disappeared after entering the public bathroom. The other was a 3-year-old boy who followed his grandmother to the supermarket to buy groceries. While his grandmother was paying the bill, the child disappeared. Now, in order to find the child, the 2 families had already mobilized their entire family to look for them on the streets, but there was no news at all. Everyone was guessing that the children had most likely been kidnapped by human traffickers, and the probability of finding them was almost 0, so families with children had been very vigilant recently. No matter how kind-looking a suspicious person was, they would treat him or her as a human trafficker first. The woman sized up the couple in front of her suspiciously and asked, "Are you guys from out of town?" Yu Bing saw everyone's vigilant gazes. Although she didn't understand what was going on, she knew that it was best to prove her identity now to prevent any misunderstandings. Hence, Yu Bing took out her and Xiaoxing's certificates from her bag and handed them over as she smiled and said, "I'm Yu Bing, the director of the Yi Mountain Brigade's food factory. This is our factory's sales consultant, Xiaoxing." Everyone leaned forward to look at the certificate. When they saw that they were staff members of a factory, they were relieved. Hence, the auntie told Yu Bing and the other 2 about the recent incidents. "I'm sorry. When we heard that you guys had accents, we became even more afraid and nervous." Yu Bing was enlightened. There were really many human traffickers in every era, and many families had been separated. Although gender equality was strongly advocated, how could feudal thinking that had been passed down over thousands of years be changed so easily? The people in the city were more progressive. The more remote the area was, the more conservative people were. They believed that raising children was for the purpose of being looked after in old age. They believed that if there were no sons in the family, they would be letting down their ancestors. Therefore, a family that couldn't give birth to a son would spend their family's savings to buy someone else's son to adopt and raise as their son. Therefore, the prime target of human traffickers was little boys under the age of 5 or 6. Because they were still young, they barely remembered things and would forget their biological parents and original family quite easily. When Yu Bing heard this news, she sighed. In a few decades, technology would become more advanced, but even then, lost children might not be able to be found, let alone now. After Yu Bing came back to her senses, she explained her intentions to everyone. "We came to City C on a business trip to open an office for the food factory, but we don't know much about City C. When we saw you guys chatting here, we thought that since you guys are all locals, you'll definitely know the situation in City C like the back of your hand. Therefore, we want to ask you guys to give us some guidance. Subscribe and read more novel to help us update chapter quickly. Thank you so much." 273 stating their purpose. "I specifically bought this mung bean cake just now. The weather is hot, so you guys can eat it to ward off the heat." With that, Yu Bing opened the paper bag in her hand and placed it on the stone table. Elders like to lecture the younger generation, and Yu Bing seemed very humble, generous, and polite. The mung bean cake wasn't worth much, but her pleasant attitude satisfied them and they started talking. "Little Yu, you're only 19 years old, but you're already a factory director. Impressive. This is the era of the young people. Look at this pair of young people. They're about 20 years old, but they already manage a factory." The auntie who was previously questioned also had a relaxed smile on her face. "Little Yu, you made the right choice by asking us. We're all born and raised in Sea City. Although we don't know everything about Sea City, we still know much more about Sea City than other people." When Yu Bing heard that everyone was calling her Little Yu, she immediately asked, "What's your surname?" The auntie replied, "My surname is Zhou. You can call me Auntie Zhou." Yu Bing also said readily, "Auntie Zhou, I want to know which factory in Sea City is the most profitable." Yu Bing was good-looking and gentle. Coupled with the fact that she was humble and polite to her elders, everyone was very enthusiastic after lowering their guard. In terms of the size of the factory, it has to be Sea City's 3rd paper factory and the state-owned 604 sugar factory. But in terms of employee benefits, Red Flag Automobile Factory is better. Indeed. My niece-in-law works in a car factory. I heard that a cinema is being built in the factory district. Red Flag Automobile Factory is indeed not as big as those 2 factories, but the employee benefits are good. Its daily employee benefits are better than many factories' monthly benefits. Others give out labor protection gloves, but Red Flag Automobile Factory gives out condiments. Others give out a box of mooncakes during the Mid-Autumn Festival, but Red Flag Automobile Factory gives out mooncakes and fruits. In any case, Red Flag Automobile Factory always surpasses others in terms of employee benefits. Everyone spoke one after another, so Yu Bing and Xiaoxing didn't even have to interrupt. They basically understood everything they wanted to know in an hour and a half. However, Yu Bing. didn't leave immediately just because she got the information she wanted. She chatted with them for half an hour before saying goodbye to everyone. This move made them have an even better impression of her. Young people liked to play with their peers, and their children and grandchildren didn't like to listen to their nagging. It wasn't easy for them to meet two children who were so agreeable, so everyone liked them very much. It was already past 8 in the evening, so the location of the office could only be discussed the next day. However, the preparations had to be done in advance. After Yu Bing and Xiaoxing returned to the guest house, they analyzed the map. As Xiaoxing looked at the situation around the car factory on the map, he expressed, "The car factory is profitable and has many subsidies for employees. There are a few thousand people in the factory, but their factory is a little remote. The car factory is the only factory at that location and the rest are mostly residents. I don't think it's appropriate for us to choose this location." Yu Bing agreed with Xiaoxing. Indeed, in order to facilitate the discharge of sewage, the paper factory is also close to the river and farm in the suburbs. This way, it looks like only the vicinity of the state-owned 604 sugar factory is a suitable choice. Xiaoxing had the same opinion as Yu Bing. He also took a fancy to this location at a glance. That's right. It's not very far from downtown, and there are supply and marketing companies and hospitals around it. These facilities are all our target customers. The flow of people isn't particularly heavy, but it's all right. Because many bus routes pass through this road, people will be able to see our shop a lot when on buses and will slowly gain an impression of our brand. Yu Bing smiled and nodded. Advertisements were actually a kind of subconscious hypnosis. You might not pay special attention to it at first, but if you saw advertisements of the brand often and saw this brand at the supply company or the mall, you would have the urge to try it. After the two of them agreed, they went straight to the 604 sugar factory after breakfast the next morning. This road was a main road that was more than 2,000 meters long. The sugar factory was at the first half of the road, and there was also a medium-sized textile factory at the end of the road. There were also 3 small factories within a radius of 2 kilometers. The more the two of them looked at their surroundings, the more satisfied they were. Subscribe and read more novel to help us update chapter quickly. Thank you so much. 274 renting. After walking around, Yu Bing and Xiaoxing took a fancy to the 2 empty shops on the road. One was a house outside the sugar factory. Previously, the sugar factory had used it to store miscellaneous items in their factory. The house wasn't big, only 50 square meters, but it was just right for the office Yu Bing wanted to build. The offer price of the sugar factory was 15 yuan a month, and the deposit was 3 times the rent. Moreover, one had to pay 3 months' rent in advance and a deposit of 1 month's rent. In other words, the deposit was 45 yuan. Even time one paid the rent, one had to pay 2 months' rent, which was 30 yuan. The other house was at the entrance of an alley in the middle of Pure Bottle Road. It was the first house and the location was all right. However, the landlord said that if they wanted to rent the shop in front, they had to rent the courtyard at the back as well. There were 2 rooms at the back of the courtyard, and the landlord's family of 6 lived on the second floor. They wanted to rent the entire first floor to earn a little more income. There were 3 rooms on the second floor, so it was enough for 6 people. The kitchen and bathroom were in the courtyard on the first floor, so they could share them together. The shop in front was 60 square meters, and there were 2 rooms at the back. The big one was 20 square meters, and the small one was 15 square meters. However, the landlord didn't ask for a high price. The area was twice the size of the sugar factory, but the monthly rent was only 25 yuan. The deposit was only 2 times the rent plus 50 yuan. After the two of them finished asking around, they came to the main road to discuss. Xiaoxing had his eyes on this private house with a courtyard. When the workers in the factory come, we won't have to rent an additional place for them to stay. The overall price is lower than that of the sugar factory. We can also keep an eye on the shop at night. Yu Bing didn't think so. She had been in business for so many years after the reform and opening up, so she had a lot of experience in renting houses. She had been scammed quite often as well. When renting a private house, the other party would calculate everything clearly. On the surface, it was more convenient to rent a shop and residence together, but that was only if the landlord didn't live there. This wasn't the case at all. The kitchen and the bathroom in the courtyard were shared facilities. There were 6 of them, but the office needed at least 2 people working there. With 8 people here, even going to the public restroom outside would be more convenient. Even if they gave in to the tenants in the beginning, as time passed, even if they might not say anything, the more people there were, the more trouble. It wasn't that she thought the worst of people, but if there was a bottle of jam or a bag of snacks missing from the shop one day, would the employees be willing to compensate them? The first suspect would definitely be the landlord. It might have been a curious customer or the sticky-fingered landlord, but once suspicion was planted, would the tenant and the landlord still be able to get along well? Renting a place in the sugar factory was different. Renting public property meant that the rent would go to the factory. Of course, at this time, most of the workers in the factory were very loyal to the factory. They wouldn't harm the interests of the factory just because the money wouldn't go to them. Because it was a fixed-income job, the interests of the employees were the same as those of the factory. They might not be willing to lower the rent or deposit, but they had their own protocol. As long as there was a protocol, they were not afraid of being screwed. On the other hand, when it came to private houses, the landlord had the final say. Although there was a contract, how many people would actually involve the law? It would be time-consuming and laborious to bring it to court, but if it reached the police station, the police would let the two parties reach a private settlement. At the thought of this, Yu Bing glanced at Xiaoxing and revealed a smile that he didn't understand. You're inexperienced when it comes renting, since you've never been scammed in these circumstances. There are many details to pay attention to. With that, Yu Bing told him everything she had considered. Xiaoxing had never rented a house before. Even the black market's office was negotiated with Brother Chang. The transport team's office was also settled by Zhou Kun and Zhang Chao. His task was to sign things and let the finance department to pay. In Xiaoxing's impression, renting a house was a very simple matter, so he didn't expect there to be so many twists and turns. He couldn't help but look at Yu Bing with admiration. Then, Xiaoxing thought about it again. How did Yu Bing know so much? Hence, he asked curiously, you've never rented a house before, so how do you know so much? Subscribe and read more novel to help us update chapter quickly. Thank you so much. 275 Property Management. Yu Bing was stunned when she realized had shot herself in the foot by showing off too much. She smiled and tried her best to look less flustered as she explained, when I was at home, my father's friend came to talk to him about renting an office. I overheard it and remembered it. Fortunately, Xiaoxing didn't think much of it when he heard this, because he was just asking casually. After all, to rural people, it wasn't strange for worldly city dwellers to know this sort of thing. Hence, the two of them returned to the sugar factory to sign the contract. However, Yu Bing was careful when signing the contract. The rented house was outside the factory, and the shop faced the street. It was dozens of meters away from the guard post at the factory's entrance. After Yu Bing finished reading the contract, she said to Director Lin of the logistics department, who was in charge of renting, Director Lin, it's fine if you won't give me a discount, but you have to give us a guarantee for the safety of the shop. It isn't far away, so your colleagues from the security department can help keep an eye on us at night. Let those thieves know that the people in the factory are paying attention. Director Lin was stunned when he heard this request. Because there was no concept of property management at this time, after renting out the house, they left everything else to others. Director Lin said awkwardly, Mr. Yu, we're only in charge of renting out the houses. I've never seen anyone having to ensure the safety of the renter as well. There's no such precedent. Yu Bing smiled and said, Director Lin, if there's no precedent, we can create a precedent. Actually, I just want them to take a look when they're free. I'm quite assured with renting from your sugar factory. There probably aren't many people who dare to have designs on a sugar factory. I just want to be more at ease. Moreover, it's almost autumn and the weather is dry. I'm afraid it'll be troublesome if a wildfire starts. No matter how much our small shop loses, the losses won't be that substantial, but it'll be terrible if it affects your factory. Yu Bing's words hit the nail on the head. The prestige of a state-owned factory wasn't to be underestimated. Ordinary people didn't dare to cause trouble here. Most of the security guards were retired soldiers or militiamen with some martial arts skills. All of them were young and strong, unlike the security guards in ordinary residential districts in the future era, in which in order to save money, the property company mostly found middle-aged and old people to be security guards for appearance's sake. When Director Lin heard this, he felt that it made sense. In any case, he would let the security guard take the time to take a look at their shop after the factory closed. There were also patrols in the factory at night. At that time, he would add a route and let them wander around the factory area during every patrol. It wouldn't take much effort. All right, let's add this. Yu Bing's smile became even more sincere. She immediately lowered her head and added this note to the paper. She secretly rejoiced that fortunately, no one knew about property management and wouldn't charge them for this. Otherwise, even if the small fees didn't seem much, it would add up to a lot in a year. After both parties signed and pressed their fingerprints, and the house was rented out, Yu Bing also obtained the right for renovation. Although she had to return it to its original state after the lease was up, good renovation was very important to the brand's image. At this point, only a third was completed. Yu Bing still had to renovate the shop in City C before she could leave. This was because this office was equivalent to a model room. Before she left, she had to take a few photos and bring them back, so the staff in the other cities could do renovations with this photo as a model. All of the brand shops had to have the same style. This way, when others went to other cities, they would be able to recognize the office of Delicious Food Factory at a glance without even looking up at the sign. Only then would a good branding effect be achieved. Yu Bing turned to look at Director Lin. I want to ask where we can find renovation workers and carpenters. Also, where's the nearest glass factory? Mr. Lin thought for a moment and told Yu Bing, you have to go to the village to look for someone who knows how to renovate and carpentry. You can go to White Mountain Village, which is the nearest, and take the bus for Route 21. After Yu Bing thanked him, she separated from Xiaoxing. Xiaoxing went to White Mountain Village to look for workers, while Yu Bing went to the nearest glass factory. As soon as Yu Bing entered the door, she was stopped by the guard, who was a middle-aged man in his 40s. He was wearing an army green factory uniform. On his left shoulder and chest, there were the words Sea Cities Ping in Glass Factory. Young lady, you don't seem to be from our factory. Yu Bing immediately smiled and said amiably, hello, I'm an employee of a food factory in City H's village. Our factory has an office at the sugar factory and wants to renovate it. We need glass, so we need to buy some from the glass factory. Subscribe and read more novel to help us update chapter quickly. Thank you so much. 276 Buying glass. The guard frowned and said, young lady, we sell them in large quantities. If you don't buy enough of them in quantity, I don't think the factory will sell them. Yu Bing scratched her head and looked up at the guard. I have no other choice. The glass specifications of the supply company outside have been set, but the specifications of our office are special, so we need to come to the factory to customize them. The guard had never heard of anyone being so particular about glass, since glass windows only had a few specifications. However, he still pointed the way. Do you see that red brick bungalow? Go there and ask, but you're an outsider, so you have to register first. After Yu Bing registered according to the rules, she went to the red brick bungalow. The label at the door said Sales Department. There were 5 to 6 desks in the office inside, but now, there were only 2 people, a middle-aged woman and a young man. Yu Bing knocked on the open office door. Hello. The man closest to the door looked up and asked Yu Bing, hello, do you want to order glass? Yu Bing walked forward. Hello, I want to order glass. I don't want to order that much in quantity, but I have some specific specifications, so I want to buy a large piece and cut it myself. The middle-aged woman's gaze shifted from the newspaper to Yu Bing. After she sized Yu Bing up and saw that she was dressed in a neat linen suit, she asked slowly, which enterprise are you from? Yu Bing reported her factory and her intention to establish an office. This was an inconvenience unique to this era. When doing business, the other party had to see if they were representing an agency first. If it was an individual's purchasing needs, these factories would directly reject them. Although the middle-aged woman didn't refuse directly, she said in disdain, the quantity isn't enough. We produce them according to the quantity of the orders. Yu Bing took out 2 bottles of jam from the factory and placed them on the woman's desk with a smile as she said, I know you're in a difficult position. Every time the glass factory sends out some unqualified glass products, perhaps you can sell them to me at a cheaper price? I'll pick them from there. They could find decent quality defective goods in the factory, but the goods for the orders the factory received had to be perfect. Therefore, it was useless to keep such defective goods and they could only be sold at a low price. However, they usually found people to collect them in batches. The middle-aged woman looked down at the jam, then raised her head and called out to the man just now, Mr. Yang, bring this girl to the warehouse where the defective goods are stored. Mr. Yang smiled brightly and replied, all right, Sister Lin. Then, Mr. Yang brought Yu Bing to the warehouse. There were quite a lot of defective goods in the warehouse. Yu Bing picked a few large pieces of pure transparent glass that had only a little bit of cracks and made note of the location. She found that the location of the cracks didn't affect the aesthetics, so she chose 4 pieces. After choosing, Yu Bing returned to the sales department to write the bill again. She realized that a bottle of jam had appeared on the man's desk, but there were only office tools and documents on the woman's desk. The woman took out the sales slip from the drawer. What specification? What quality? Mr. Yang noticed the extra jam on his table as soon as he entered, so he immediately replied, 1 piece of glass with a thickness of 0.5 cm and 3 pieces with a thickness of 0.3 cm and 2 square meters. There are quite a lot of cracks on the pure transparent glass. Yu Bing marveled to herself that gift-giving culture really had a long history. In the end, she bought it at an extremely low price of 12 yuan. In addition, the cost of the 2 bottles of jam was slightly more than a yuan, which was equivalent to only spending more than 13 yuan. At other places, she would have to spend at least 18 yuan. After Yu Bing handed the money over, she thanked the 2 of them with a smile. Thank you, Sister Lin. It's been hard on you, Mr. Yang. You even accompanied me there. Mr. Yang smiled and waved his hand repeatedly. It's what I should do. There's a driver that pulls carts at the door. Tell them to spread the cloth thicker. I'll wait for you at the warehouse entrance. After you being paid, she left and saw two drivers in the distance. She chose a driver who had the most cloth strips. Then, she handed the receipt to the warehouse manager. After the warehouse manager confirmed that the receipt was correct, he let Yu Bing and the driver in. Yu Bing called the driver to pull the glass into the cart, while Mr. Yang pulled the warehouse manager to the side to smoke a joint and chat. Subscribe and read more novel to help us update chapter quickly. Thank you so much. 277 Brief Wooden Wind. The master glanced at Yu Bing's thin body. Just as he was about to carry it alone, Yu Bing wrapped her hand in a cloth and raised a piece of glass. I'll help you. The driver was stunned for a moment. Seeing Yu Bing's serious expression, he raised the glass and moved it out of the door with Yu Bing. Then, he placed it in the cart gently. The remaining pieces were relatively small, so it was easier to move them. After helping the driver move the glass up, Yu Bing said goodbye to Mr. Yang and the warehouse manager before leaving. After unloading the glass at the office, Yu Bing waited for more than an hour before seeing Xiaoxing return with a few people. One of them was a carpenter who had brought his son along. The remaining 3 people were led by Uncle Zhao, who was the oldest. The 3 of them were in charge of carving out a rectangle that was 3 meters long and 1.5 meters wide from the wall 1 meter away from the door. Then, they smeared putty on the entire room and separated it into a small office of 15 square meters. The office would be used as a signing ground for customers. Yu Bing wanted to build a simple log-style shop. The left-hand side of the door was designated as a display area, and the right-hand side was a recreation area to entertain guests and chat about products. Against the wall of the display area, the 3.5-meter-tall wooden cabinet made of top lattice covered the entire wall. It was made of raw wood varnish. The lattice of the wooden cabinet had 3 different specifications. There was a square with a 0.5 m x 0.5 m specification, and there were also rectangles with other specifications. Nowadays, people's aesthetics were still limited to symmetry. Yu Bing wanted to break this aesthetic standard and attract the attention of the people coming and going through creative designs. In the middle of the shop, there was a row of waist-high wooden cabinets. At the bottom, there was a locked cabinet that could be used as a small warehouse to store samples. On top, there was a flat display table where the products would be arranged in various positions. Then, according to the holiday, there would be all kinds of gift boxes displayed. In the recreation area, there was a sofa and a small wooden coffee table. There was a wooden shelf with green plants in the space between the sofa and the office. Coupled with the 2 large floor-to-ceiling glass windows beside the door, the environment was refreshing and elegant, making the people who entered feel relaxed. When Xiaoxing heard about this design, he was filled with anticipation. At this moment, as he watched Yu Bing talking to the workers, he felt that she was like a small sun in the winter. She was bright, but not blinding. She was warm, but not scorching, making him feel the urge to get close to her. After giving instructions on the renovation, they began to discuss the price. Uncle Zhao provided the materials and construction. After all, Xiaoxing and Yu Bing had limited time and were amateurs, so it was better to let the expert state the total price, which added up to 45 yuan. The carpenter's family had the habit of storing all kinds of wood, so the materials and labor cost a total 70 yuan, mainly because high-quality wood wasn't cheap. After the discussion, both sides started renovation at the same time. The renovation would be completed in 3 days. By the time they were done, it was already past 3 in the afternoon. The 2 of them found a random shop to eat at. Then, they took the prepared materials to the local Commerce Bureau to file. They originally thought that with the approval from the Pingjiang County Commercial Bureau, after finding the address and showing the rental contract and various factory documents, it would be very easy to file it. Unexpectedly, they encountered a tough nut to crack. After a young lady in her 20s read the document, she rejected Yu Bing's offer. I'm sorry, this won't do. I've never heard of an office having a display. An office is an office. It isn't a shop. Why do you have to display products? When Yu Bing saw the other party's bureaucratic demeanor, she knew that giving gifts definitely wouldn't work on her, so she could only try her best to explain, an office is ultimately a place where the factory communicates with the outside world. Our factory is in City H. People from afar can't go all the way there to check out the goods, but if they don't, they won't be able to place the order with peace of mind. The young lady was still unmoved. Then you can take the products to their factories. Isn't this how many people run their businesses? Why can't you guys do it? Yu Bing was very dejected. From the looks of it, Director Wu must be from a wealthy family and didn't know that the competition outside was so intense, nor did she know that if one didn't work hard, one wouldn't even be able to eat one's fill. If they didn't think of a creative way to sell their products and use the traditional method, how could a food factory in the village compare to those large state-owned factories in the city that already had established brands and had already established deep connections with various large organizations? If they had not done something out of the box, the food factory's orders might not have even expanded out of the county city yet. Subscribe and read more novel to help us update chapter quickly. Thank you so much. 278 Kidnapping. However, there was nothing else Yu Bing could do, so she still had to continue to persuade her nicely. After all, she was in charge of the shops in the area of Pure Bottle Road. Director Wu, doesn't taking the products to their offices to display have the effect? It's just that one is placed in the shop, and the other is taken out, but the essence of it hasn't changed. When Director Wu heard this, she thought about it and felt that it made sense. However, she felt that the rules didn't allow this. After thinking for a long time, she still refused. No, the rules don't say that offices can display products. Only shops that sell products to outsiders can. Yu Bing felt that she was about to go crazy. This young lady was so young, so why couldn't she think things through? She took a deep breath and continued, Director Wu, there's no rule that says that it can't be displayed, right? Director Wu was stunned. This seemed to be the case. However, she thought of the principle her father had told her. She had to be impartial when enforcing the rules, and she was responsible for every decision she made. Hence, she rejected righteously once again, don't think about bending the rules. If the rules didn't specify you can, it means you can't do it. When the bell rang, Director Wu began to pack her things and prepare to get off work. Yu Bing could only go back and think of another way before coming back tomorrow. They had already paid the rent deposit and the renovation deposit. After spending so much money, they had to set up this office. The next morning, Yu Bing came over herself while Xiaoxing was in charge of supervising the shop. After the sky turned dark, Xiaoxing watched as Yu Bing returned angrily. As soon as she saw him, she started to curse, Director Wu is simply crazy. She's only in her early 20s, but she's as stubborn as an old man. Not only did she refuse to give us an office with a display function, but she even asked me to return to Pingjiang County to reapply for the approval form first. She said that the word display can't appear on it. This is the first time I've seen such a stubborn person. At the end of the day, she's afraid of taking responsibility. However, she has no idea about the difficulties we low-level personnel face. She's an ordinary officer, so if she's afraid of taking responsibility, she can look for the higher-ups for special approval. She has no right to refuse to look for her superior and pass the buck with me. This was the first time Xiaoxing had seen Yu Bing so angry. Her voice was so loud that he didn't dare to make a sound. Half an hour later, after Yu Bing finished complaining, Xiaoxing said gently, I'll go with you tomorrow and see if there's any other way to resolve this matter. Since Yu Bing and Director Wu quarreled in the office today, it was indeed unsuitable for her to go tomorrow. Thinking about it, she decided to let Xiaoxing try. On the other side, Director Wu Ling, was being reprimanded by her father at home. Mr. Wu was the deputy director of the City Seat Commerce Bureau. After knowing that Wu Ling had quarreled with the staff, he asked about the exact situation after dinner. After all, it had a negative impact on the bureau. Mr. Wu's expression darkened when he heard the cause and effect. Wu Ling, is this what I taught you? Wu Ling was already in a bad mood after the argument with Yu Bing. When she heard that her father was blaming her, she was puzzled and aggrieved. Dad, what's wrong with what I did? I followed the rules impartially. What did I do wrong? As Mrs. Wu watched cartoons with her son, she listened to their conversation. She was also very troubled by her daughter's inflexibility, but she still had to protect her daughter after all. Seeing that her husband was about to flare up, she hurriedly said, talk to the child nicely. When Mr. Wu saw his wife stop him, he suppressed his anger. This isn't called enforcing the rules impartially. This is called passing the buck. You're so inflexible. What's wrong with what the other person said? Aren't these two things of the same nature? Which sentence can you refute? Just like you said, the rules didn't specify anything. If you don't know what to do and are afraid that you've made the wrong decision, then go to your superiors instead of refuting them. You can't even find theoretical evidence to support your point of view. Why right do you have to say that you're right and that the other party is wrong? Wu Ling subconsciously wanted to retort, but she didn't know how to. Seeing that his daughter had nothing to say, Mr. Wu continued, she said that she came from a neighboring city to set up an office, but you told her to go back and redo the process again? Aren't you causing trouble for her? The documents they gave her are just a reference. The key is what the documents we approved are. You're making things difficult for her. Subscribe and read more novel to help us update chapter quickly. Thank you so much. 279 Human Trafficker. Wu Ling muttered softly, I didn't want to make things difficult for her. I just wanted the contents of the document to be consistent. Mr. Wu knew that Wu Ling was an inflexible person, so he could only explain the situation to her. We belong to a subordinate unit of the government. To put it nicely, we're officials, but in the end, we're a department that exists to regulate and manage the public affairs of the entire society. Our main goal is to solve the problem. You have to know your priorities. Is your so-called unity the crux of this matter? Is it necessary? Wu Ling understood what Mr. Wu meant and whispered, then tomorrow, I'll ask my supervisor to approve the office application form for Delicious Food Factory. Mr. Wu reminded her, if your supervisor doesn't approve, remember to ask the leader for the reason. Don't argue foolishly. You have to be reasonable when retorting. The next morning, as Wu Ling looked at the signed document in her hand, she began to reflect on her work style. Sister, I want to go out and play. Wu Gang tugged at his sister's sleeve. The kindergarten was on summer break now, and Grandma Wu had been feeling unwell for the past 2 days, so Mrs. Wu took leave and brought her to the hospital. Mr. Wu had to go to the city government for a meeting today, so the heavy responsibility of taking care of the child landed on Wu Ling. As Wu Ling looked down at her 3-year-old brother, she patted his little head and said, Go, but you're not allowed to leave the office building. Wu Gang nodded excitedly. This office was too small and he was done exploring it. It was time to go to the next place to start his adventure. When Yu Bing and Xiaoxing arrived at the metal door of the Commerce Bureau again, Yu Bing noticed that a middle-aged woman was squatting beside the metal door and feeding a little boy the lollipop. When the woman saw Yu Bing looking at her, she pulled the child to the other side. As she walked, she asked, Is this candy delicious? You can eat an orange-flavored candy later. When Yu Bing saw this, she felt very dejected. Was she being treated as a human trafficker again? After watching the woman disappear around the corner with the child, she retracted her gaze and looked at the office building in the distance as she said helplessly, What if you get refused as well? Xiaoxing chuckled. This is unlike you. Didn't you say that you're an unkillable cockroach? Yu Bing also laughed. That's right. We have to do it even if we can't. The two of them discussed their strategy for negotiating with Wu Ling later. Yu Bing was caught off guard and bumped into someone's arm. I'm sorry. Yu Bing saw that it was the middle-aged woman she had seen just now. She was smiling and apologizing to her. With that, the woman carried walked forward quickly with a snakeskin bag. Yu Bing touched her arm, which was in pain from the collision. As she watched the woman disappear again, she felt that the other party was a little strange. Thinking of the conversation between the woman and the child she had just heard, the strange feeling in her heart intensified. When Xiaoxing saw Yu Bing's dazed expression, he asked, What's wrong? When Yu Bing heard Xiaoxing's accent, her eyes widened slightly. She knew what was wrong now. Previously, when the woman spoke to the child, she was coaxing the child to eat candy. However, parents were usually afraid that their child's teeth would decay, so they rarely took the initiative to give candy. Moreover, as soon as she placed the first one in the child's mouth, she was in a hurry to use the second one to entice him. Thinking of the kidnapping cases that the women mentioned, she was shocked. That woman has an accent. Moreover, she didn't have a snakeskin bag with her before. She only obtained it after she went to the corner with that child. Xiaoxing quickly guessed what Yu Bing meant. Human trafficker? Yu Bing grabbed Xiaoxing's hand. Let's chase after her. The two of them hurriedly rushed towards the direction where the woman had disappeared. However, when they reached the corner, they saw the woman turn into another alley. Yu Bing didn't dare to shout loudly for fear of alerting the enemy, so she could only run with Xiaoxing. However, when they walked to the place where the woman had disappeared and saw the alleys, Yu Bing and Xiaoxing didn't know which one to take. They could only randomly choose one. After more than 10 minutes, they were lucky enough to see the woman again. She was still holding the snakeskin bag, and there was a man in blue clothes beside her. The moment their eyes met, the woman immediately knew that Yu Bing and Xiaoxing wanted to snatch the child in their hands, so she pulled the man's hand and ran back. Subscribe and read more novel to help us update chapter quickly. Thank you so much. 280 Slander. They were about 100 meters apart. At a fork in the road, Yu Bing watched the two of them run away from each other. As she ran, she said, I wonder who has the child. Chase after that man to the left. I'll chase after that woman. Hence, when they reached the fork in the road, the two of them began to chase after them according to the route they had chosen. Yu Bing hadn't run for nothing this year. After chasing for more than 10 minutes, the woman finally bent down and supported herself against the wall. She panted heavily and said, Stop chasing me. I can't run anymore. Moreover, it's useless even if you chase me. The child isn't with me. Yu Bing went forward and grabbed the woman's hand. Then, she pulled it behind her and scolded sternly, just because the child isn't with you, it means you aren't a human trafficker? Let's go. Yu Bing planned to drag her to the police station and call the police at the same time. Xiaoxing was alone now, so Yu Bing was a little worried. The woman was already exhausted and could only let Yu Bing push her forward. After walking for a few hundred meters, they arrived at the main road. After a few minutes of panting, the woman recovered. She didn't know where Yu Bing was taking her, but she knew that it was definitely not some place she wanted to go. Hence, she began to think of a solution. With an idea in mind, she suddenly turned around and bumped into Yu Bing's body. Yu Bing fell at a disadvantage because of her light weight. After her hands were free, the woman ran forward. After Yu Bing stabilized herself, she shouted as she chased, "The woman in front is a human trafficker. Help me catch her." Previously, there were not many people in the alley and it was far away, so it was useless to shout, unlike now, when there were many people on the main road. When the passers-by heard Yu Bing shout, they were a little hesitant about whether to help. After all, they could not judge the authenticity of her words. Yu Bing was so angry that she wanted to beat them up. At this moment, the woman had already crossed the road. Just as Yu Bing was about to chase after her, a bus drove over quickly. Just as Yu Bing thought that she could not dodge in time and was about to be crushed, a hand grabbed Yu Bing's collar and pulled her back. "Look where you're going." After Yu Bing came back to her senses from the shock, she shook off the other party's hand and said, "Let go. I have to chase after the human traffickers." The man repeated in a clear voice, "Don't worry, my colleague has already chased after them." Only then did Yu Bing notice that the man was wearing a police uniform. She immediately shouted excitedly, "Police! I've finally encountered you guys. That woman has a male accomplice. My colleague went to chase after her accomplice. He's in this area." At this moment, another police officer returned with the woman in handcuffs. "Zhao Bing, we've caught her." Zhao Bing immediately told his colleague Lin Ci about the accomplice. Then, he shouted with a dark expression, "Who's your accomplice? Where is he now?" The woman looked a little afraid, but she still continued to refute, "You arrested the wrong person. I bumped into this young lady just now and she wanted me to pay compensation, but I saw that she wasn't injured, so I didn't agree. She wanted to extort me. Since her plan didn't work, she's starting to slander me." Yu Bing sneered. "You're making it up. If you confess, we'll consider lightening your punishment. If you resist, we'll punish you severely. If your accomplice is caught and confesses first, you'll miss a good opportunity to atone for your crimes. Do you really plan to bear the consequences all alone?" Zhao Bing looked at Yu Bing with dismay. Why was this young lady even more familiar with these lines than him? He coughed lightly and said to regain control over the situation, "This girl is right. If he's caught, you won't have a chance to redeem yourself by finding him with us. Lin Ci, I'm going to chase after her accomplice. Take her back to the police station first. Otherwise, she'll think we're joking with her." Yu Bing was also in a hurry to look for Xiaoxing. Human traffickers were all vicious people. If that man had a knife, Xiaoxing would be in danger. The woman's mind was also racing. She didn't know if the man could escape or not. As long as the man ran away with the child, these people would not be able to get evidence to punish her. After all, no one had seen her put the little boy in a snakeskin bag. After analyzing the situation, the woman calmed down. Not only could she not expose the man, but she also had to help him stall for time. Hence, the woman continued to complain with a bitter expression. "Young lady, I only bumped into you once. You don't have to take revenge on me like this. Police, you can't listen to her one-sided story. Subscribe and read more novel to help us update chapter quickly. Thank you so much." After Yu Bing came back to her senses from the shock, she shook off the other party's hand and said, "Let go. I have to chase after the human traffickers." The man repeated in a clear voice, "Don't worry, my colleague has already chased after them." Only then did Yu Bing notice that the man was wearing a police uniform. She immediately shouted excitedly, "Police! I've finally encountered you guys. That woman has a male accomplice. My colleague went to chase after her accomplice. He's in this area." At this moment, another police officer returned with the woman in handcuffs. "Zhao Bing, we've caught her." Zhao Bing immediately told his colleague Lin Ci about the accomplice. Then, he shouted with a dark expression, "Who's your accomplice? Where is he now?" The woman looked a little afraid, but she still continued to refute, "You arrested the wrong person. I bumped into this young lady just now and she wanted me to pay compensation, but I saw that she wasn't injured, so I didn't agree. She wanted to extort me. Since her plan didn't work, she's starting to slander me." Yu Bing sneered. "You're making it up. If you confess, we'll consider lightening your punishment. If you resist, we'll punish you severely. If your accomplice is caught and confesses first, you'll miss a good opportunity to atone for your crimes. Do you really plan to bear the consequences all alone? Zhao Bing looked at Yu Bing with dismay. Why was this young lady even more familiar with these lines than him? He coughed lightly and said to regain control over the situation, this girl is right. If he's caught, you won't have a chance to redeem yourself by finding him with us. Lin Xiai, I'm going to chase after her accomplice. Take her back to the police station first. Otherwise, she'll think we're joking with her. Yu Bing was also in a hurry to look for Xiaosheng. Human traffickers were all vicious people. If that man had a knife, Xiaosheng would be in danger. The woman's mind was also racing. She didn't know if the man could escape or not. As long as the man ran away with the child, these people would not be able to get evidence to punish her. After all, no one had seen her put the little boy in a snakeskin bag. After analyzing the situation, the woman calmed down. Not only could she not expose the man, but she also had to help him stall for time. Hence, the woman continued to complain with a bitter expression. Young lady, I only bumped into you once. You don't have to take revenge on me like this. Police, you can't listen to her one-sided story. Subscribe and read more novel to help us update chapter quickly. Thank you so much.